Hey there, Achievement First, Geometry. 6.7 Perpendicular Bisectors is today's title. And the aim, take a moment, read it to yourself. Let's get into it. So here you can see the definition of a perpendicular bisector. I recommend you pause this just so you have some time to process it. Key things I would bring up is that a perpendicular bisector is a line or a segment, could be a ray, but it is not a point, it's not an angle, it's not something else weird. So it's talking about a line, or possibly a segment. Also just keep in mind, you know this word, perpendicular. That means the slopes are what? Hopefully you're telling yourself. This. The slopes of perpendicular lines are opposite reciprocals. Alright, let's get into it. So now let's get into an example. Example 1, right here, you can see it. Alright, let's do it. So I'm going to call this point A. No. Alright, that's A. This point right here is B. B has coordinates. Take a second, figure out what they are. At this point, I'd say just pause the video and figure out what the coordinates of A and B are. Alright, so now I have the coordinates of A and B. I want the perpendicular. Nope, I want the perpendicular. So, let me do this. The slope of AB would be 3 minus 1. That's terrible looking. Alright, I'm going to redo it. Try to figure out what the slope is. Just pause here. So 3 minus 1, negative 2 minus 6. Hopefully you would like how this simplifies. I think negative 2 over 8, which simplifies to negative 1/4. That should hopefully feel pretty good to you, given that this line slopes down to the it slopes down, or it leans to the left, which is what lines with negative slope do. Alright, so what comes next? I want a perpendicular line to have slope. I'll say M sum perpendicular. I should have a perpendicular slope. I think it would be that. So now I know the slope of the line I want. I know where I want it to go, so it's supposed to be a bisector, so middle would be like there. So I want perpendicular bisector to go through there. Let me figure out exactly where it should go. It seems pretty clear that the midpoint should be, let's say, around here. It looks like it's right in the middle to me, 2, 2. But let me just check. Let's see, so midpoint formula popped in right there. Let me zoom in on it. Alright, so I believe one of my coordinates was 6. The other was 1. I already forgot, how embarrassing. The other coordinates were negative 2 and 3. Negative 2 and 3. Alright, simplifying that, I think it gives me this, which then means my midpoint. I'm using a lowercase m over here for slope and a capital M for midpoint. Maybe that was confusing. On the next slide I'll pick a better letter, or a different letter for midpoint. So if I know division, I believe I will get 2, 2 for my midpoint. And that looks like what we thought it would be. That definitely looks like it's right in the middle at 2, 2. Alright, next up. So I have the point 2, 2. I have my slope. My slope, again, we said was 4 over 1. So I think my line will go up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's to the right 1, or down 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pow. Alright, so this line right here should be perpendicular, should form a right angle. Now what I need is the equation of it. So let me move all this stuff there. So when I want the equation of a line, as you know, I want it to look like y equals mx plus b. And I know the slope of my line, there it is, I know the slope of my line from before, so I'll plug that in where it says m. And are we going to leave that? The answer is no. I need to find out what b is. I'm not supposed to leave b as just a letter or a variable. I need to actually find out what its numerical value is. So I need to know if I know any points on this line. Do I know any points on the perpendicular line whose equation we're trying to find? Yes, I do. I know this point right there, 2, 2. So let's plug it in. Looks like that. There has to be some easier way to write 2's on this thing. Alright, so I plug in 2, 2, and now I solve for b. And take a moment, pause if you haven't already, find b. I got -6, which looks about right. Like, given my picture, I think this line might have a y-intercept down there around -6. Find the equation of the line. So my final answer, y equals 4x minus 6. Alright, let me do this next example. I'll just go a little faster. Alright, here's example 2. Notice it's a little bit different, but the math will largely be the same. Pause here, try to figure out what your first steps, or what my first steps will look like. So that's what I do first. Next up, now that I know what my points are, and that simplifies to 5 over -12, so I have my slope is -5/12. So is that the slope of the line I have, or of the perpendicular? Well, hopefully if you look at this line, you would say, well, this line is definitely leaning to the left. It has negative slope. The perpendicular will look like that and have positive slope. So this number must clearly be referring to the slope of this line right here. I want the perpendicular, so I think my perpendicular line will have a slope of 12/5. Where should it go or pass through? I think it should pass through the midpoint, which I guess is around here-ish. Probably midpoint, and have a slope of 12/5. So let me see if I can find out exactly where that is. If it's going to bisect it, it needs to be going right through the halfway point. So I've dealt with the perpendicular. Let's check. Now I'm going to deal with the fact that it's the bisector. So it needs to go through the midpoint. As I said I would, I'm going to call the midpoint x, which is way cooler than m and isn't the same letter. So let's see. What should go into my midpoint formula? I think it might be this, which simplifies, I believe. If you haven't already paused, find it yourself. Let's see, I got that. Does a fraction make sense? Well, let me plot that point. Let me zoom in on it. -2, 0.5. Be there. Does that look like it's halfway? Let's see. Is this? I would say yeah, it's pretty good. I'm confident in my math. I think I did a great job. So next up, I want to. So now that let me put another check here. So I've done perpendicular and bisector. Now I need to actually give the equation of the line. I drew it in there. It looks really beautiful. Let's zoom out here. All right, line equation time. I got that. I think I know the slope. How? Now, if only I had a point. Oh, wait, I do have a point that I know is exactly on this line. Oh, I said x, but I never actually wrote it. Let me actually write that in there. So there's x referring to the midpoint of the segment AB, which means, again, perpendicular, right angle, bisect. Let me show which segments are equal. This half and that half. Alright, where was I? Got sidetracked. Oh yeah, I was finding this equation business here. Alright, do I know a point on this line? Yup. Let's plug it in and see what happens. Let's find out what b is. And this point you're probably crying because we've got fractions that we have to do with. Well, I'm sure we'll find a way. Alright, so I have this. I'll multiply. We got that. And to move 24/5 from this side, the right side, over to here, I think I should add 24/5. It'll help me isolate B. I believe I will get something. Find out what you think I'll get. So I got this 24/5 minus 1/2, which looks pretty ugly, but there's a couple things I can do. One, I could go over to decimals. I think 24/5 is like 4 4/5, which would be 4.8 minus 1/2. So I would get 4.3. Or 4 3/10, and I could go backwards to figure out that is a fraction. Or I don't have to be such a quitter. Just because I have fractions doesn't mean I have to run to decimals or to mommy. I can, get a common denominator. Take a moment, pause, do that yourself. I think you get this and 43/10. Hey yo, that's the same as 4.3. Alright, what am I doing? Like, what is all this? Oh yes, this is actually the answer for B. This is what B equals. It's not just random math for fun. So I found out what B is. Now, let's go back. I had this equation. I didn't know B, so I plugged in. But now I do know B, thanks to my work. So I believe my final equation will look like this. And because that looks like I drew it with my left hand, I will read it. Y equals 12/5 x plus 43/10. Alright, so here's example 3, last example. We're given a vertical line. Remember, vertical lines have, you can see the letter N that it forms. No slope. None, no. So with this line, I have an equation that looks something like, maybe you remember, x equals -4. Alright, if I want a perpendicular line, it's going to have to be perfectly horizontal. Horizontal lines have equations of the form y equals, and I'll just say y equals k, or k is some number that I'll figure out later. Alright, I want this to be the bisector. So I need this to go through the midpoint. So I could do the midpoint formula, but just quite honestly, if this is down at -2, and this is up at 4, think about how long this is. Hopefully you said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So halfway would be 3. So either go 3 from here or go 3 from here. Either way, you'll find out that's the midpoint. So I vote that as the midpoint. And if I want this to be perpendicular, I think it should look something like so. Well, what would the equation of this line be? Well, it's y equals something. What is that something? Hopefully you are saying at every single point along this line, the y value is 1. So there you have it. That is the perpendicular bisector. Booyah. Hope you learned something. I hope you can duplicate this process and do even better than I can. Alright, peace.